ask everybody to get seated. I know there's sort of some card confusion, and I'm sure that the scholars, people can deal with that. Maybe you can write on a piece of paper and then get an orange card later so we can get started. I'm going to let everybody sit down up there at the top. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I'm Heidi Hobbs. I'm the Director of the Master of International Studies in the School of Public and International Affairs, which is one of the sponsors of this program, as well as the Office of International Affairs. This is the Global Issues Seminar Series. This is the third of this and the last one this semester. Perhaps that's why so many of you are with us tonight. We have an interesting topic. One of the things that the Global Issues Seminar does is to try to highlight all the many expertise, different people with tremendous expertise on campus. And tonight we're looking at global sustainable livelihoods using innovation to drive sustainable development. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our four panelists to you to give you a sense of the breadth of the different expertise that they bring to the subject area. I also want to point out that this is being filmed. So I'm going to be optimistic that once everybody gets in a seat that they're going to stay there because we are going to be filming this and running some slides with the filming. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Maria Correa, who is Associate Professor of Population Health and Pathobiology in the College of Veterinary Medicine. She received her PhD from Cornell University in veterinary medicine, and her focus is on agricultural health and food safety, with an emphasis on disease control programs for zoonosis surveillance, public health in women, and development programs at local and international levels. Our second presenter is going to be Vivek Fellner. He's Associate Professor in the Department of Animal Science. Professor Fellner received his PhD from the University of Missouri in Animal Science, and his area of research has been on nutrition with emphasis on the digestive gut of the cow. I had to look that up. I didn't know what a rumen was. It's the first stomach of a cow. Our third speaker tonight is going to be Kofi Boone. He's Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture. He received his Master of Landscape Architecture and Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources from the University of Michigan. He is here in the College of Design, and he works in the landscape context of environmental justice, and his research includes the use of new media as a means of increasing community input in design and planning processes. Our final panelist tonight will be Duarte Moraes. He's Associate Professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management in the College of Natural Resources. So we've got four different colleges represented here tonight. He received his PhD from Clemson University in tourism marketing, and he examines how tourism is used by those with power to sustain their long-standing dominance, and how tourism can also be used by poor communities to break away from dependence and to gain a degree of self-determination. So we have a very broad depth of knowledge about the topic of sustainable livelihoods, and we're going to hear from our speakers now. Thanks.
It's a lot of preparation. And I think that this was it, right, Chantel? It's nothing like technology when you don't know how to use it. So I'm going to talk about, in reality, I'm not going to talk about my work per se, but I'm going to tell you a story of my change, the change I went through since I was your age until today. That's a lot of time. And most of the times we say like the dinosaurs used to walk when, I went to school, but I'm not sure if it's true. But I'm going to tell you about innovation starting at home. Because we talk about a lot of innovation, and we talk about a lot working in the global market and the global world today. And what is innovation and sustainability? And in particular, in my work with disease control, for me, sustainability is when a disease is controlled, people remember how to control it even after I leave the country where I'm working on. And then I come back 2 or 3 years later, and the disease is under control, and people remember how to do it. Okay, so that sounds simple, but it's very complicated. And I hope I'll show you some of the complications that we go through when we develop these kind of programs. So I don't think I have to convince you of any of this. This is where we are today. So invention and innovation are crucial components of development. But what is innovation and what is invention? For me, it's a lot of adaptation, right? The copycatting, the piggybacking, the leapfrogging. Have you heard those terms? Yes, you probably have. So what I do in my work is I look for ways to innovate, to solve problems that people need to be solved, like diseases, disease control. I work on diseases transmitted between human and animals, and there are more than 100 diseases of those. Anybody knows any diseases transmitted between animals and humans? Sorry? Okay, that's one that is not. I mean, what about forms of tuberculosis? Okay, tuberculosis from cows, transmitted from milk. Brucellosis, a disease of cows, transmitted also, from milk and other fluids. Okay, so we have a lot of diseases that come, and infect humans through food, and food safety issues are also of my concern. But it's also personal contact, and you go to some countries where you are just eating dinner and the chickens are going by, and you just see the wildlife is constantly with you, and so people live with their animals in many cultures in very close contact. Okay, so diseases transmitted from animals are very important. And with budget cuts, many of the public health programs in a lot of countries I work are just reduced budgets, and so it's very difficult to control the diseases or have permanency in the programs to maintain the disease under control. Okay, so this is where I think we are now, and we all believe on these 4 items, or these are the tenements of my work. So as I said, I work on public health in development, and I have, I used to work in the, you say from the farm to table, but in my case it's from the grass to milk, because that's a veterinary, trade. And it has to be all holistic and inclusive. I cannot work on a disease control program, and I used to believe on the top-down programs very much. And now, throughout the years, I have changed, and I'm more into the grassroots. And then grassroots have to meet top and find a middle ground to maintain the permanence of a program. And you're going to hear the word permanence a lot, because for me, that is sustainability in a program, right? So that example you see there, and I hope this is the laser pointer. No, it's not. Oh, Vivek is always prepared. How do you make it? Just button. Oh, there is a button. You see these 2 women, and this is a market in the highlands in Bolivia, and they have a pig there. And you may not see it very well, but one of the women has a cloth in one hand and a wood stick on the other, and she just dries the tongue and grabs the tongue and puts that stick in there so the animal doesn't close the mouth. And then she presses the tongue to determine whether the tongue has these cysts in the tongue, and this is associated to a disease that we all know has a cycle between humans and pigs. Right? So we have the parasites, the humans, and then we defecate in the open, and then the pigs come and eat our poop, and then they get sick. So it's just sort of like, a cycle like that. And it goes on and on and on, because these pigs are used as environmental cleaners, right? Try to control the pigs, try to give these people latrines, then you have a host different of, issues to control. So what happens? This program was created many, many years ago. And people were taught, once. Somebody went there and taught them. This is the way you inspect the tongue. If you find a cyst or these little objects or things that they look like when you press the tongue, they're in there, then the pig has the disease and you cannot eat it because you will get sick. So they were told that. Nobody went back to work with them, and the disease just picked another name. It's not more tiniasis or cysticercosis that they care about. Now it's trichinosis. Has nothing to do with it. So this is what the things I look when I go to evaluate programs in the field, public health programs. When was the disease control measure introduced? How long people were there? Have they done reviews? Have they gone back? Have they worked with people again? Have they trained someone in the community to maintain the program? Does the program have any long-term permanency? So this is a case, a typical case, that I see in many other countries of programs that have no permanency. Nobody went back. You go only for a few weeks. You think that is fabulous. You spent all your grant money, And then there is absolutely no way to know if the program still works or not. So I'm going to change that. At the end, you're going to see that I'm not the grass to milk person anymore, because that doesn't work very well in developing countries. From, we have seen the programs in Canada, it's called from the fork to table, and in other countries, like in the US, it's called from the farm to table. But it doesn't work very well. So all of these things that I do when I work, we're not learning in school. There was no coursework that prepared me for this. And there was no sufficient time in school to be prepared for all this work. I came out with a very strong background in mathematical modeling. I knew a lot about diseases of animals. But then when I went to the field, I found out how arrogant I was, thinking that I knew the answers to all the diseases and all the problems people have, and I could do anything I wanted anywhere. And the reality is that the questionnaires I use are, have prefixed answers. Well, in these four choices, which one is the one that best describes the disease for you? People don't think like that. I mean, we're assuming that we know what people are going to answer, and that is very arrogant for an epidemiologist to do. So I learned from anthropologists, and I changed my mind on the way we do questionnaires, and it's just more like listen. Oh, it's very difficult to listen to people without having your cultural bias, interfere. Listen to people and try to be very inclusive and appreciative of culture, even if you have the cultural differences like this one that that is a useless test that they're using right now. By the time this pig has cysts on the tongue, the animal is probably 80% contaminated. So, it's just a test that doesn't measure very much. So one of the things that I am finding now, what means to be sustainable for public health programs, and I'm having a lot of problems. I like to work with multidisciplinary teams. And here in this panel, I have worked with 2 of the members. And in fact, we spent what, 10 days in a microbus, in a van in India with Vivek visiting farms and schools. So we have worked together. But when you work together, you have a problem in academia, and it's that your department heads, and I hope there are not too many department heads here, or your deans will be asking, oh, you got money for this project? Where is the overhead going to go? Who's going to get the money in your department? And we go like, what? It's just, that's not the structure we want to work on. We want to do good. And then we're constrained by all these walls, that they don't allow us to really expand and do our work the way we want. But we also found that many agencies, and in particular the big agencies where we go for money or for funding, they have very, very narrow focus for the money they give. And so sometimes there will be money for 2 or 3 diseases or for a package of ideas, and then you don't fit on any one of those, or you fit barely in one of those, and they're very competitive. I mean, it used to be one, you write 3 grants and you get 1. Then it went to 7, and by the time I graduated, it was 10 grants you need to write to get 1. So this is, becoming very difficult to get funding to do any kind of work. And the more multidisciplinary you are, even though we want multidisciplinary work, the more difficult it is getting to get funding. So some of these agencies we work with have different immediate and long-term goals. And when you are working in the field, like we were in Bolivia or Honduras and Ecuador or Nicaragua, we run into different agencies. We all have these different ideas what sustainability is. We all have different frames to work with. So I have a year, I have 2 months, I have a week, I have $2 million, I have 200,000. It's just incredible that we work there, we find each other. In some places, like in Malawi, there is one hotel where everybody working on aid find each other. So if you want to find someone to work with you, or you want to just have a chat with someone else from another agency, international agency, it's the only hotel you can go. So you're going to find everybody there after 4 p.m. So happy hours becomes very important for your connections in Malawi. So, and we talk, with other experts, and we find out that we are doing almost exactly the same kind of work. One disease, another disease, one project, another project, and we never combine our projects together. Working for, food quality in one, water quality in another one, and we never are working together. So that is what impedes a lot of the sustainability and the permanency planning and to find that, to just achieve the goals of our studies. One of the things that I've seen that a lot of agencies are doing is that they are conducting all these studies to find out how people react or the mitigation strategies they have. But then they don't do these needs assessment or rapid rural assessments that are, I think, sometimes more useful. I encounter people in Bolivia who told me, we are tired of the academics coming here to study how we do things. We want people to, you must know already how we do things. We can tell you how we do things. We want action programs. Okay, so there is also people getting tired of us going to the same places without finding a solution. And I don't know if you see there, but I watch a lot of movies because I think some of the movies have messages that are incredible. The men who stare at goats, the researcher is in the field studying and he's talking to another person and the only thing he can think is like, you are crazy. Just like, that's the feeling you have when you're talking to other people you encounter in the field. You are crazy. What are you trying to do? I mean, you're just like, that's the way we feel. So, and many of the studies I found are done with one goal in mind, but they don't consult the people or they don't integrate the object or of their study into their overall planning. Okay, so we decide that this is needed and we're going to go and do it. Okay, so whether or not people need it or not. So I found in that a lot of that. So what are we against? And this is not only that we are against this, but this is what I think we all need to learn. There are these laws of culture, and I think it's more than 10 minutes, right, that I'm going already. Transmission of culture is proportional to the interaction time. Think about this. If you go for a week, how much change do you think you're going to implement? Right? Very little, right? So the longer you stay in a place, the more you learn from the people, the more you learn to work with them, the more permanency your program is going to have. Culture in motion tends to stay in motion. So once you introduce that little change, maybe that change stays there. And other things come. Innovation is added. Other ideas come from the group of people you're working with, and then they will continue moving towards a goal, for example, in our case, to maintain cysticercosis below 10% of the population. This is a disease that kills people everywhere in the world. Neurocysticercosis. This disease, the larvae stays in the brain and kills people. So for us, 30% is very high. We want to reduce it. How do we reduce it? We teach people to wash their hands. Very simple things. Boil, water. Treat the people who will have the parasites so the eggs don't spread everywhere. So we want people to remember the very basic things of our control program. So once we push people in there, we expect that that motion and that energy will continue and maintain. And then the more we stay there, right, the more force we implement, maybe that is the change that we want to implement. And maybe it goes from up to the top, and the top will listen. The public health authorities will listen to people asking for their programs. And I tell you one example that happened to us also in Bolivia. The government wanted to control cysticercosis, right? I said the cycle goes from humans defecating in the open. So what do? They give people cinder blocks to build latrines, and they don't teach them how to use them, or and then so people said, okay, we live in these mud houses, in these shanty towns, and we have now one room made of cinder block. So they never used it, and they used it to storage their grain. So the pigs are still walking around. So there you see a failure of a program, right? There is no continuity. There was no motion put into, right? It's just the time you were there was very, very small. You spent a lot of money on building that, and it just doesn't work. So the other problems that I have right now, and we are encountering, is that there seems to be 3 or 4 diseases that are in the mind of everybody. And we were talking with Duarte, right, a few minutes ago. HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, and poverty now is included. Like if it were a disease, it's included to that list. Poverty is very difficult to define, but it's just included in there. So what do you do when you work on none of those areas? So I tried to piggyback to some of these programs, But piggybacking is good for me because I can go to countries and work with other programs and do my part and convince them that maybe, you know, for poverty and malaria and these things, we need people that are healthy. Yeah, I understand that, but they're healthy and they have healthy animals. So I buy, you know, I sell them there and they buy, you know, I sell my idea that way and they buy it, and I piggyback with them in the programs. But then I have the problem that I come back and my department head says, well, where's the funding for your program, right? So we're always having those programs. So one of the things that I encountered this year was arguing with USAID. Some of their ideas, you know, they were giving these $80,000 grants for 1 year, and I was like, really? I mean, what am I going to do with $80,000 in 1 year to go to Nepal? I mean, it's just expensive and time-consuming to get there. I mean, it's just, these agencies just have one thing in mind, and that's all they want to do. You know, and this is what you're given, and it's unrealistic. So you have to be very concerned about that. Too many studies finding out how people mitigate climate change. We all know, I mean, in many countries how they do it. So we need to stop with, you know, funding agencies. We need to argue with the funding agencies, telling them we know already quite a bit of that. So what do I do in order to work then in my area of development and sustainability of public health programs? Well, one of the things I think I can do is teach students, right? So I have several graduate students that now are doing sandwich programs. You know, they come here from countries like Malawi, they come from Nepal, from other countries, and I make them, you know, they do their coursework here for a couple of years, and then I send them back home. I send them back home to do research. Because I think that research has to be applied. They need to know who are they going to work with when they go back, and they just need to learn their own culture from a different point of view, right? They're going to be professionals. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just training students to go back to their countries of origin and help me. One of my students is working on issues like this. There is a disease transmitted in the blood of sheep and cows. I mean, and if you're trying to, you know what that kid is doing? I mean, do you have any idea? How do you peel off the skin of the sheep? You just use it for carpets or whatever. How do you do that? It comes out very easily. I mean, we just put a air pump, right? And we put pressure, and then it inflates, and then it's very easy to peel. But they don't have that in many slaughterhouses in the altitudes in Peru and Bolivia. So what they do is they cut the skin, and they blow air by hand. And it's like, blow air. And then they suck all the blood with it. And they get sick, and they die by 15, 17 years of age. Right? If they do that, this was a 10-year-old in a slaughterhouse. Okay, so these are the things that my students are studying. These are things that are good for their development and sustainability. I'm done. Okay, so that farm-to-table approach, I reverted. I don't think I can work that way anymore. It's just very difficult to go to a farm and then convince the farmer to do something. So what I do is now I want to go to the restaurants and the tourist area, and that's where I think Duarte and I will, you know, probably one day get that funding that we want. And then from there go down, you know, go down into the food chain. Instead of going up, just go down to do some training and certification of good agricultural practices, and you know, use low cell phones, low-tech cell phones to do that, which is something that a few of us are trying to do right now. Okay, so what happened to my presentation? It went away. I had one last slide. I don't know where it is, but anyway. So for me, as I say, sustainability has a few things that I really need. In public health innovation, it's a lot of times not translation of programs and not imposition of our public health ideas into another country. Transplanting a public health program from the United States to rural areas in Bolivia will not work. Okay? So you have to adapt. You are the one that has to change and work with the people to adapt the program the best you can and your knowledge, and learn from them, so you can, you know, put that culture in motion so they can change. And then when they change, then you're going to have that sustainability in your programs. And then with 2 years, when you go back in 2 years or 3 years, you find that they're still doing the things you, you learn with them and you create it with them. Okay? Because if you impose a program in public health, it just doesn't have any permanency. All right? I think I'm past my time. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, okay. So how many of you have never seen a cow? Everyone seen a cow? Everyone drinks milk? Good, we'll talk about the topic today then. I work primarily in the area of gut microbiology, have got my training in gut microbiology, but over the years I've been very fortunate, been in academic situations, been a lot in research situations, and I've now included just about everything that moves in the gut. I kind of follow it. And so I work with different species, including tigers, monkeys, apes, chimps, you name it. Anything that's got a gut, got critters in there, I work with it. What has that got to do with the topic today? A lot, and I hope that we'll come back to that a little bit later. So what I want to do in the brief, my 2.5 minutes I've got left, is introduce a problem that we have as a society that you and I have created and are going to find a solution to it, and open it out for a lot of debate. There are lots of facets to this which I won't be able to cover, but hopefully in the discussion we can take a jab at it, and then present a technology that I think has been around for hundreds of years that I think is very effective in perhaps meeting some of those challenges that we have to face as a society. So agriculture is where I spend most of my time and effort in, talking about food systems, talking about quality, safety, and one of the paradigms that I'm looking at that a lot of people have presented is that the world food supply has to double by 2050. In a very short time, the world population growth is just skyrocketing. So to meet that, the demand for food has to grow. What's very critical to understand is that the same amount of food that has to double in the next 40, 50 years is what took us the last 300 years to reach. So it's almost a logarithmic scale that we're looking at as far as food production goes. And we also have now other stimuli that are affecting that. We have climate, energy, health, environmental impact, carbon footprints, everything that comes into play when we're talking about generating food for our sustenance. Biggest challenge, end hunger. Okay, that's the bottom line we're working towards. And of course, more recently, minimize environmental degradation, greenhouse gases. Everyone's becoming really involved in different activities, different things that we can do to minimize our carbon footprint. Paradox, ag food systems do account for a large number of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, the value can vary anywhere from 10 to 40%, depends on what data you're looking at and what papers you read. But then when you look at the plants in the soil that actually are an integral part of that agricultural food system, are also essential in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so you got a real dichotomy here. The same system, two very diverse operations. One thing that we don't hear a lot about, and maybe some do more than others, is the generation of food that we are talking about results also in a lot of waste. And the more I look at numbers, for starters, we actually don't today even know how much waste we generate. And I've gone to the federal agencies, gone to the state agencies, EPA, DOE, USDA, we don't have it. Estimates are there, but they're very vague. So municipal waste generation, that's us here on the rise. Huge amounts of waste we generate on a daily basis. This is just a simple graph to tell you where that waste goes. More than 50% is discarded. Landfills, okay, primarily. So think about that. About 100 million tons of food wasted each year. This is just food. This is just garbage in our backyard that we're talking about. 100 million tons. Does not include the municipal solid waste, does not include ag waste. So numbers really pile up fast. That is about a $30 billion waste, just that amount of waste that generates. On top of that, we have to pay another $1 billion to dispose that waste, okay? The numbers really start adding up. As a society, we are facing these challenges. Just put this graph in there to, again, point out that landfills are generating a fairly significant amount of our greenhouse gases. Okay, these are landfills that you and I need because we're generating the waste. We got to get rid of it. And now that our NASA program's been shut down, we can't even go to the moon anymore. So it's got to be right here on planet Earth. All right, so very quick, very brief synopsis of a problem. And the many technologies that are currently operating, there are many technologies that we're looking at. There's one that's been around for hundreds of years that I really support and working very closely with, because that's where my expertise comes in, which is fermentation. And anytime you've got waste that's put on landfill, or cows or animals that dump on the roads or in fields, what happens to that waste? Okay, good analogy. I never thought of that, but that's exactly what's happening. Okay, and that releases gases. So we are actually generating these gases, primarily methane and CO2. You all do know that those are the two prime culprits for the greenhouse issue, right? Which one's worse? CO2 or methane? 50-50, right? It's methane, actually. Methane is 20 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. All right, so when you have these fresh piles of waste, in this case, cows that are defecating or urinating on fields, that's generating gases, that's decomposing, and that's released to the atmosphere. Okay? Landfills cause a lot of that greenhouse gas emission because they are just out there in the open fermenting. That's aerobic fermentation. And this technology that's been around for many years and many countries still use it, is called anaerobic digestion. So essentially just taking that waste and giving it a cover. Very simple. Containing it. So you all know what anaerobic environment is, right? Where there is no oxygen. Exactly. And when you do that, there are certain critters in there, Pac-Mans, that thrive on no oxygen. And so they get to work. So it becomes more efficient. It has been implemented, and it is currently being investigated at various levels. You can apply it at a commercial village. You can apply it in a household level. I've seen countries where they have little anaerobic digesters right alongside their water heater or their air conditioner. And you can run your garbage disposal right into that container and let it digest. Very similar to what else do we do in our backyards? Composting, right? Only difference is that here we're giving it a sealed environment, not letting it go out in the atmosphere. The commercial technology behind this, I think, will explode in the next few years. There are many companies that are currently extremely interested in this technology for many reasons. This is a chart that I've put together. And we've got two companies here in North Carolina that are, in fact, just this morning, we had long discussions about trying to use this technology to generate electricity, waste to electricity. Lots of feedstocks you can use, cellulose, ag waste, animal waste, landfill waste. Throw it in this digester, and you get several products that you can pull out of this fermentation. The big ones that the companies like Progress Energy, Duke are interested in is the methane hydrogen goes to electricity used for gas. We got several other compounds that can be used as liquid fuels. The end product of this process is fertilizer and potable water. So very, very strong positives for this technology. And the big thing is it's waste. Okay, if you look at the data, food supply is going up, along with that waste is going up. We have no choice. There is absolutely no survey, no data set I have seen where they've shown that waste generation is going to decrease. So we have to face how we're going to use that waste. And this technology does allow you to not just take care of the waste, but it allows you to generate electricity. And we are all about generating electricity today, right? It does stick on the health side, and again, in a very quick snapshot manner, on the health side, when you cover waste, when you cover landfills, give them an anaerobic environment, you're taking care of a lot of pathogens. Okay, airborne pathogens come from those exposed landfills or any exposed trash. You close that up, allow it to ferment, you take care of a lot of the pathogens, reduce smell. You all know what the back end of a cow smells like, right? So if you don't cover that up or you have that out in the open, that does, you know, when you're spraying fields, you can smell it. Less pollution, and folks, we have less global greenhouse gas emissions as well. So one technology that works well, and we can open it up for discussion and talk about that later. Thanks.
Feedback loop. Yeah, it's a little tricky. Thank you. All right. My name is Kofi Boone. I'm in the College of Design. I'm a professor of landscape architecture. What we spend our time doing is teaching students how to make things. So we have 5 disciplines, 5 departments in the College of Design. Landscape architecture is the design of outdoor spaces. So for example, landscape architecture involved in the design of this campus. Most famous landscape architect ever lived, Frederick Olmsted, designed Central Park. In terms of American history, that was the birth of the urban park movement, but a lot of the ways that we design outdoor spaces fit within the Sustainable Livelihoods framework. I'm also co-director of our Ghana Study Abroad program, which we've had at the College of Design since 2001. Since that program started, we've taken about 300 students, faculty, staff, and professionals to the country of Ghana and through West Africa for various reasons. And so part of this presentation in the context of Sustainable Livelihoods talks about some of that work. One thing that we do believe in very strongly is we want to give our students and our peers the tools to engage people that are very different from them. Looking around the room and in your experience, it's a challenge for you if you want to work in a global environment, and you've heard it from Maria's talk as well as Vivek's, to start to explore those tools that allow you to make a real direct connection with folks, because a lot of the future is co-creation, where people come from different places, different attitudes, come together around a single problem and have a process for solving that problem. In the College of Design, we teach the design process, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But to give you some background for this particular study, you can look at your own clothing. I'll look at mine as well. You probably have no idea where the cloth came from, where the dyes came from, where the waste went, and when you're done wearing it, you may actually be an altruist and sort of a positive person and think that you need to donate it to a struggling so-called developing world area. One of those areas that receives crates of clothing every day is Ghana, West Africa. The irony of that is that there are indigenous local forms of making, fashion, clothing, textiles, that have existed for hundreds of years, that embody people's cultural beliefs and their attitudes that form the basis of their social structures as well as their economies. So through the goodness of our hearts, donating things that we don't need in the interest of helping others is actually one of the biggest factors that's killing their ability to sustain their lifestyle based on clothing and textiles. So typically that's not a design problem. How do you make something that's locally made, where you know where the cloth came from, you know where the dyes came from, the symbols with which they're made have value? How do you protect that? And how do you position that so it can compete in the global marketplace? And that was the basis of this, which was student-driven work. Global Mamas, which you see the logo on the right-hand side, was our partners, a non-government organization based in Ghana. Comes from Women in Progress. Women in Progress is an organization that started in 2005, and since 2005 lifted 500 families out of poverty by teaching them entrepreneurial skills and marketing their traditional ways of making by connecting them to local markets. You go to Cameron Village right now, 10,000 villages, Global Mamas is a brand there. And their fastest growing market area is children's clothing. What the students were asked to do, we'll just make do. What the students were asked to do were to help with two particular challenges. One was, how do we start to increase the market appeal and the market demand for fair trade for children's products? One of the real advantages of students, as you probably know, is you're learning, right? So you aren't, in a lot of ways, some of you I can tell are kind of set in your ways already. We try and break you so that you kind of get out of that mindset. But we're plastic. We haven't settled yet. We're open. We discover. We consume information all the time. That pursuit of information and that knowledge in the context of a place where people have been doing the same thing in the same way for decades and centuries and generations is a very helpful tool, this sort of constructive naivete. Like, I have no idea what you're doing. You know, explain it to me step by step. I've seen 10 different examples of how they've done that in different ways. Let's try it out. You know, that enthusiasm, that naivete is something that's really valuable, particularly for design. So design and access is one of these things. The other mission is that a lot of textiles and cloth, and here's a sample of some of the cloth, batik, wax release, right? So cotton, harvested in farms in Ghana, woven into cloth, paraffin wax and other forms of wax for creating the patterns, locally made dyes, stamped, hot water, cold water, stamped, hot water, cold water, and you get that cloth. A lot of those cloths on that wall took about a week to make, would sell for $5, $6 US a yard here. But that kind of money, fair trade, environment, is enough to sustain a family in Ghana if handled the right way in a year. But a lot of that is done in sort of difficult situations and difficult means and difficult settings where children are exposed to emissions from open stoves. We went to people's households where children were burned, either from contact with the wax or contact with the hot pieces. The dyes that they use are actually toxic, right? So if you inhale the dyes before they're properly mixed, they lead to long-term cardiovascular and respiratory issues. And of course, the materials, if they don't sell, if they don't make it to market, provide no value to the place. So with 500 families out of poverty since 2005, currently about 220 women in the program, learning entrepreneur skills, business skills, as well as this craft of art and making in 200 different locations. So they could all have the same pattern, they could all have the same expectation in mind, and they all bring their stuff together and you get 200 different garments when you're only supposed to have one. So the other thing they're trying to compete with are places like China, India, other parts of the developing world, so-called, who are mechanizing their process and not paying fair wages and providing for a fair livelihood, who can provide a price point, exact same product that's half the cost of theirs. So the idea of consolidating, still providing the fair trade opportunity, but something that's not known in Ghana, which you all are on a campus right now, right? Lots of buildings, lots of landscape, lots of different things happening under one roof. You got a situation where people are doing it out of their own homes, in open courtyards, in village settings. What happens when you bring 200 women together in one setting? What are the possibilities? So the students were asked to look at that. That's the site that they were considering between two small four fishing villages in Ghana on the coast, the Gulf of Guinea, between New Ningo and Pram Pram. Those are the typical settings. That's one of our partners. And one of the things that was also touched on is the idea of co-creation. In terms of design, the best way I can describe it is most people come into our school are attracted to great architects and great artists and great sculptors and imagine having this idea in their head and working and working and working to achieve their own individual idea, the sense of, I made this is mine, as an idea of design. By analogy to sports, it's like football, where every designer wants to be the quarterback. Give me the ball, I'll make the play, I lead the team. In co-creation and in terms of working with women like this person on the wall, we try to teach designers to think more like defensive backs. Defense. The ball's already in the air, already been thrown. You got to react to it. You can catch it, you can let it drop, you can let the other person drop, but you didn't throw the ball. You have to catch it, receive it, and make a play. So co-creation works that way, which is giving up that entitlement, giving up that perspective that you have all the answers, that your perspective is right, that it's a situation where they don't know the answer, that they're dumb somehow, right? And instead of seeing them as a charity case or a service object, as a partner in the co-creation of a new thing. So in this sort of romantic, bucolic kind of setting in her backyard are a whole host of hazards that until we highlighted them and analyzed them, that she was even being exposed to. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of them. But we did talk about them in this way, and this is how we started to unpack it. And in design, you always have this situation where you have to make something, but you have inputs on one side, things that you're using to form the design, and you have outputs on the other side, right? So there are things that go into the process of making, and there are things that come out. And in the middle is the boutiquing process, right? But what we talked about is that takes energy, that takes organic materials, inorganic materials, a lot of different things. And in the outputs, we have the ability to intercept the things that we think are negatives and bad things, combine them with state-of-the-art processes and sustainable design, turn those into good things, feed back into the process, keep the process going, or at least remove some of the danger and the warning. So thinking about these flows of energy, of waste, as Vivek talked about, I think pretty eloquently, is something that we took on as we took on that assignment. And lots of different ways of engaging things. One of the best ways to learn about something is to do it. So we had 16 students who had never even heard of batik before they got to Ghana. 16 students had never been to the continent of Africa. They just kind of went on a whim, right? But making batik was the most significant way of learning all the stressors, all the risks, all the other situations that women were going through in making the cloth. That's the image up in the top right. Talking to folks, in certain cases directed questions like interviews, but in certain cases conversations, open-ended questions. Where do you go to church? You know, how long have you been in school? You know, what's your favorite color? Stuff that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the design problem builds that trust and rapport such that over an extended period of time you learn more. Gaming, so that's the upper right. We do a lot of that, which is most people don't have the ability to start from scratch. Resources are no question. You got all the money that you need. How would you make this place? What are the things that we need to consider? Where would you get your water? Where would the energy come from? Would you have a bathroom? Where would you get your food? And in the case of the women, many of them had small children. Where would the children go so that they're out of harm's way? So gaming. And direct observation. So in certain cases, being silent, saying nothing. So in the lower left and right images, observing. Quietly observing and making notes about how people are doing things. It's one thing when you ask someone what they think is the right way to do things. And it's another thing to observe them. And it's interesting to compare them. In certain cases, they may say things that don't translate into what you actually observed, and it can lead to provoking some questions. But out of that, and we'll end with this one image, were visions for how to organize this place for 200 women to continue their lifestyle, to compete in fair trade situation, to have a livable and sustainable setting within which to do that. One observation that the students made that the organization and the government and the universities there had never made was maybe a school on site was a good way to handle children so that they're out of the making process and out of the harm's way of the making, but close by, close enough where 1-2 minute walk, people can observe, see what their children are doing. And instead of being out of that process, being in the economic process, about the educational process, they're actually socially engaged and improving themselves as well. So there were many of these that were generated. These are being used right now by the organization to pick a site, to buy, and to begin to fundraise to develop the first centralized facilities in Ghana for the making of batik cloth to our fair trade. So in terms of sustainable livelihood design process, the idea of being presented with a problem, being willing to engage in a process together, and being humble enough to learn yourself along the way.
Good evening. My name is Duarte Moraes. I work at the College of Natural Resources. My field is tourism, and in specific, tourism and poverty. Probably, I would suspect all of you are tourists. You probably went on vacation this summer. You're heading to a family vacation for Thanksgiving, and you will do that at Christmas. And I wonder if some of you have thought about the ethical dilemmas of traveling to a place where people have struggling livelihoods, and you're there in leisure, and usually perhaps you think about the price of that meal, but you're on vacation, you're going to splurge a little bit, and you kind of are spending all this money, and perhaps you might wonder how much of this money stays in this local economy. Economies are tough everywhere. Let's say we go to Asheville to visit. Asheville, there's a lot of struggling folks in Asheville. How much of the money you spend in one night in Asheville really stays in the local economy? And some of the tax from your hotel room expenditure stay with the local city. How much is, of a $100 hotel stay, how much of that stays in the city? Is that money used to help do homeless shelters, for example, or do education to people that need to retool themselves to get a new job since they lost their job? So that's really the kinds of issues we talk about in the research program that I'm going to share with you, People First Tourism. It's not really how to get more tourists to visit Asheville or how to get more tourists to visit North Carolina or South Africa or Portugal, which is where I'm from. It's more how can communities make the most from tourism, and how can the most vulnerable people in that community have a stake on tourism development and benefit from tourism development, okay? And so for a while, myself and some of my colleagues, Professor Jean Brothers is here with us as well, we've done research for a long time about tourism destinations and what's been going wrong, right? Because you may have images of Cancun and beautiful beach and luxury hotels, and then these usually darker colored skin people being very servile to us white folks coming in and having fun. That's troubling, right? And so we've studied that, we've published about it, and after about a decade of that, we've come to the realization that we need to grow out of that and start trying to find solutions instead of just identifying problems. And so for the last couple of years, we've been invested in that, all right? And actually, you see Penn State's logo over there because there's folks there in humanitarian engineering. And you are in the engineering programs here at NC State. We have pretty good programs, so I imagine some of you would be. So folks there are working on this project as well in computer science and mechanical electrical engineering, and trying to find essentially frugal engineering solutions to humanitarian problems, right? And the other logo is from University of Pretoria. Since last year, we've been collaborating with them to look at tourism and poverty in South Africa. So as we documented all these problems in tourism and tourism's big unfulfilled promise of helping vulnerable people, right? You've heard perhaps about ecotourism, right? Probably had relatives, maybe yourselves went to an eco lodge, and sustainable tourism, all right? But then when we studied it, for the most part, tourism has failed to help the vulnerable, and it has failed to sustain fragile environmental resources as well, all right? And so as we were trying to find out why and looking at the bad things, we started looking at big thinkers that have found the same thing in international aid and other West-centric projects to help the poor, all right? And so we've come to this conversation, this global conversation about how helping actually breeds helplessness, about how we shouldn't really think of solutions to the poor. We should talk with them and maybe listen to or work with them in identifying their problems, and then trying to work with them to co-create solutions with them, all right? Folks talked about a good metaphor is the bottleneck is at the top of the bottle, right? And so this author is commenting on how there's these millions of dollars in international aid, that very few of those dollars trickle down to make a real impact in poor villages in Ghana or in South Africa or here in the coastal plains of North Carolina, okay? So what's the solution to poverty? It's a complex problem, and it probably requires a multifaceted solution. And we are convinced, and I hope I can convince you, that tourism can be part of that solution. Because tourists have been going to poor areas for a long time. In a way, poverty sells. We're shocked by it, but we're intrigued by it. And in many of these poor areas, the environments are actually spoiled by industry and stuff like that, and roads and big houses. They live in shacks. They're cute and different to us. Our lives are boring and structured, and their lives are emotional and happy and colorful. So we go there to see them. And can we find ways to leverage this attraction of the Western-born white man and woman, to leverage that, take a slice of that money and empower these people that otherwise are just isolated out there. Nobody really sees them even, okay? So that's what we're doing, all right? The other aspect of what we're doing is to leverage IT. There's actually a large group of people around the world talking about IT for development or IT for change. And you see here a list of reasons why IT is identified as a type of engineering, a type of science that can be instrumental to instill change, to change things around, to eradicate poverty perhaps, all right? And it's very cheap for us to start using some of that. And we're collaborating with awesome folks here on campus. They're called ITNG. It's a service center of NC State, and they are focused on innovative IT systems, okay? And so we've been talking with them and the folks in Penn State, and we did field work in South Africa last year, and we're doing it now in North Carolina to try to see if we can come up with a way to leverage IT and leverage tourism to instill change and eradicate poverty, all right? And we think we found it, all right? We developed a system, it's called People First Tourism, because it's not just tourism, it's tourism that is for the people, by the people, okay? And there's a lot to it, and I'll mention some sources later, which I hope you'll be curious enough to look up. But there's a crucial aspect about these, let's call it just a website to be simple, okay? How many of you have used Orbitz or have booked an airline or booked a hotel online? Almost all of us. We do that now, right? And we look at other people's recommendations of restaurants. How many of you have gone to TripAdvisor or restaurants.com, or there's a gazillion of those sites, right? Okay, so now IT is part of consumer behavior, and tourism is a form of consumption. So how can we get this there, all right? We started thinking about creating this web portal to compete with Travelocity and Orbitz and USairways.com, because there was a study, well, probably several studies, looking at eBay, the impact of eBay. eBay is something you're all familiar with, and they were quantifying how many people were able to supplement their income through selling stuff on eBay. Many of you perhaps have done that. Some used clothes or something like that help get a little extra income. Okay, so how can we do something like that for tourism? Probably not too hard. You know, there's already all these websites that are selling tourism experiences. So what's missing? Even from eBay, what's missing, we found, is that the only people that can use eBay, can get into Travelocity, are people that have to have access to this machine, to a computer, okay? So we've created now a system that speaks to cell phones, regular cell phones, not our smartphones, a regular old Nokia 100N or something, okay? All it needs to do is to receive text. And guess what? Now this system is accessible to everybody in our planet. Does that make sense? If eBay worked with cell phones, if you wanted to buy somebody's shirt and you could send a bid to their cell phone, anybody in the world could sell a t-shirt, okay? So if a dance troupe from a village in Ghana wants to sell a dance, okay, they can be in our website, and a German or a Portuguese father like myself can go to the website, to peoplefirsttourism.com, and make a reservation, and that reservation is received as a text by this person, indigenous person in the middle of the jungle in the furthest, most remote place in the world, where there's no roads to get there and there's no phones, line phones, but they have a cell phone that they charge with solar panel and that they go to market once a week to receive messages and send messages, okay? So this is what we've done. Okay, there's many aspects to it, and hopefully we'll talk later about the details. This is what the website looks like. It's live. All the people in it are fake people. I came up with some cute Portuguese old, villagers, and some people from Pittsburgh that will walk with you around Pittsburgh for $25, tell you their story in town, and things like that. And we're trying to mimic what these might look like. And within the next 10 months, there will be real people here. Some from North Carolina selling services, some from South Africa, some from Portugal, some from Chile and Patagonia, most likely, okay? So that's kind of how it would look like, or how it will look like. Networks of vulnerable people having little tourism services, perhaps selling things that they already do, traditional ways of living. Even some of you perhaps are from rural areas in North Carolina. Some relatives of yours might take an urbanite that doesn't know what nature is like, take them just to the woods and talk to them about it, okay? So just a few pictures from our field work in basically concept validation in South Africa. This is today the reality. See, there's some tourists there. They came on this van. They were staying at a $300 a night eco lodge to see tigers and elephants, okay? And they were being taken back to the airport at the end of their vacation. And these kids from a village called Justicia were on the side of this dirt road in little tangas, skipping school, not hanging out with their siblings or their elders, dancing, pretending to be savages, okay? So that the tourists would stop to take a picture of them, and there's a guy next to them that will take a volunteer, a donation. That is the sickest thing ever. And I'm in the business of ending this issue, all right? So there's all these people now, but doing tourism in this same area. This is still in Kruger National Park. They go there, they're taking pictures of a leopard, in the trees. But I've spoken to many tourists, as was mentioned before. My field actually is tourism marketing, so I know the tourists, okay? And they want to take a picture of an elephant, but they want to connect. They want to have real experiences, intimate interactions with locals. Most of us know that going to a resort in Africa surrounded by poor people and all you do is eat luxurious food and you're served by people with white gloves in a kind of a colonial kind of reenactment, and then flying back home and showing your friends are going to think you're really not cool for doing something like that. So we know there's a market demand for these other experiences, okay? This is a picture of the alternative. These are some local folks in Mozambique. Since I speak Portuguese, I could navigate, unworried through Mozambique. And these folks were saying, yeah, tourists pass by our village all the time in four-wheel drive vehicles, but they don't really know. They don't seem to know, what we can do, and we want to do business with them, but they don't have any way to do that, okay? So we're creating a way for these folks to do business with these tourists that are going to swing by. And this is another thing that I wanted you to have an image of. This little shack sells airtime on cell phones. And much as we found from poor homeless people here in Raleigh, they've come to our classes to talk about their lives, and they say, yeah, we use Obama phones. There are these phones that they get for free. They have so many minutes a month, and then they can charge them with minutes. I would suspect most of you have plans, maybe family plans even. That's not the case with people at the bottom of the pyramid. They don't have that income certainty, so they just charge their phones or run out of minutes. The other thing they can do in some places in Africa is to exchange minutes on their phones for cash. So an old lady can receive her pension from the government, charge up her phone, and then she can wire 10 minutes to her son in a different city or even in a different African country. And he can go in the middle of the jungle to a little shack like this. This is, by the way, 3 days, four-wheel driving away from a gas station. And she can exchange 10 minutes from her cell phone into cash to buy groceries, all right? So this is kind of the frugal ways in which we're going to imitate PayPal but apply to some of these regions. And so I think this is the last slide. This is what we're doing right now. We're incubating people-first tourism networks, some in Pittsburgh, in the coastal plains of North Carolina, in South Africa, in Portugal, with empowerment partners, with organizations that have been helping these people for a long time. They've been there for a long time, right? I'm not coming around from around the world asking people to be part of these of this system. We're partnering with folks that have been empowering vulnerable people for a long time. We're developing the website. You'll see that it's still kind of rough. The core of it is there, but it needs to be improved. And we're doing research on why are people poor, what's keeping them from standing on their own 2 feet and having a dignified life. This is now an invitation to you. We have a blog. All you have to do is Google People First Tourism, and you'll find us. We're on Blogspot. This is an example of an academic discussion. Every fall, I teach an undergraduate course called Poverty, Sustainability, and Tourism. And our students are interviewing people that are homeless or that have a small struggling business. They are writing letters to the legislature talking about kind of grassroots influence of political decisions. And they're trying to debate on some of these issues. In this case, women are often the most vulnerable among the vulnerable, okay? And if you're a graduate student, in the spring, I'm offering a new course. It's a little pitch here, Poverty, Sustainability, and Tourism, okay? So if you're interested, you can look it up. And that's it. I'll leave it up for questions.
All right. We only have this one mic, so I'm going to open it up for questions, and so I'm going to let you just shout out your question and direct it to one of our panelists, and then they'll repeat it so everybody can hear. So I'm sure people have questions, so let's hear what you got to say. And don't all talk at once. Right? Yes.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. The evidence is that the industry has detected that, okay? And they have found ways to make a profit on that need. And there's sometimes there's even cases of legitimate claims that they are doing projects to help locals and to try to get a competitive advantage over other members in the industry that are not as socially conscious or environmentally conscious. And that's, I think, marketing and CEOs in the huge tourism industry, which is one of the largest industries in the world, they're highly paid experts, right? And they go after this. They spend a lot of money on certification and labeling. There's awards. They have to compete to be considered for awards and for certificates and things like that. And so that's just a very tangible explanation that you probably are familiar with. If you travel with, if you go to Holiday Inn, you'll see things on the bathroom saying, help us be eco-conscious. Don't throw your towel down if you can reuse it, you know? That's mostly responding to market demand. If you read National Geographic Traveler, they will mention which companies, travel companies, have awards for being pro-poor or socially conscious, all right? So all that is evidence of market demand for these kinds of things. The problem is that there's also not too much incentive for those that have power to change things up, right? Because they are making a lot of money from filtering market demand, big travel agencies and web portals. And so they will only change as much as they have to change so that they can continue to have an advantage on the market, all right?
Yes, go ahead.
I have no idea. No. The question was the top 3 differences between people who make local garments in Ghana versus the West or the United States. Oh, boutique garments, okay. Well, one, I would say market, and part of it is sort of Duarte's comment about demand. Is a lot of the market that Global Mamas and Women in Progress have tapped into are people who want to support a sort of poverty eradicating social agenda with their purchases. So there's an effort to not only just receive the good, but they provide information about who actually made it, and they have a whole process where each batik artist from start to finish actually makes the garment. Online, you can link up with the particular artist to figure out their lifestyle and that sort of thing. So I think part of it is the social mission of the organization that differentiates it in certain categories specific to Ghana. Another one is just a basic cost of living impact between sort of the West and a place like Ghana. Family household income in Ghana, annual income is between $400 and $500 a year. When you deal with fair trade, a lot of the way that Women in Progress and Global Mamas have structured their program, that means that based on productivity, women participating in the program can make up to 150 to 200% as a baseline of the average income. So in the beginning, we're dealing with like $250 to $300 more, almost double the baseline income, and then incentives to do more. So that sort of margin is different between the West and here, in my opinion, based on just different quality of life standards. I think the third part is, although they curtail their products to Western consumption, in a lot of ways, people there still have more direct connections to the land, more social networks to get supplies, and more of a culturally dominant way of thinking about putting together patterns, putting together colors, putting together symbols. So the actual development of the product in that particular context is more of a cultural exercise. It's a global thing, so it's all a mash. And I'm imagining there are probably situations that are true here in the West where those same dynamics occur. But in Ghana, it's much more succinct and more clear.
I think one thing to note is that you have opportunities to go to some of these places with our study abroad programs. Dr. Boone leads a trip to Ghana, so we have a lot of different opportunities to go to some of the places that we've been taught. We have a study abroad to Pretoria? No, not yet, but we'll try to get, we're hoping to get that online. What else, what other questions do you have here tonight? Yeah, okay, go ahead. That's a good question. Yeah.
We modeled, we didn't really actually invent anything with People First Tourism. We're just benchmarking from successful models. The one that pertains to that is kiva.org. Are you familiar with Kiva? Anybody here? With that, really inspiring. A friend of mine told me about it, and I hope some of you here for the first time today. Go to kiva.org, and with $25, you can lend it to struggling entrepreneurs around the world. And how can you trust giving $25 to a complete stranger with a veiled, face, and in the Middle East, for example, which is my region of choice, and expect them to pay it back? And I have done that 6 years ago, and I received repayment every year, and I've re-lent 6 times my $25. So 6 people have benefited from that. And the reason that they're so successful is that they work through empowerment partners. If an NGO in Morocco has been working with women that make garments, and some of their women need credit, they will approach Kiva and they will vouch for them. And then the women in that sub-network help each other to pay it back. And so that's the model of microcredit. That's kind of the science of microfinance and microcredit. It's a network supporting each other with a vouching empowerment partner. That's how we will work. So we have identified the first few empowerment partners, and we're leaving it up to them to distinguish among a large number of vulnerable individuals which ones are at the cusp of standing up on their own 2 feet. They have the motivation, they have the skills, and all they need is a little nudge. So we have faith that system will, take care of it, because we couldn't really vouch for folks all around the world, right?
talking a bit about that.
Yeah. So, as I said at the beginning, I believed in top-down programs. I always believed that there was very good intentions from governments and public health authorities. And I also believe that a lot of money was needed in order to induce change and for that to become sustainable, and I don't anymore. I think that you need to, we use, and you heard that several times, the co-creation and empowerment terms that we've been using in different ways. We have used them, all of us have used that. So I believe in working in small communities, and then like a disease become contagious. So one community is empowered, then another community will take that, and then we'll try to imitate, and we'll try to co-create, and we'll try to work with them to achieve that goal. So I believe on that. I mean, that's the way for me to not create dependency, because dependency, when you create it, it just doesn't have program permanency. You come back in 2 years, and in women who were taught to give fluid therapy to their children, 1 spoon at a time with boiled water. You go 2 years later, nobody remembers it. Nobody does. So to not create dependency, you learn, you listen to from people, and you learn to sing. In Africa, you sing, and you learn their ways, and then through their culture, you just completely get rid of that dependency. It's just part of their own, they own it. It's part of their culture.
Just want to add to that, I think you can hear me, to what Dr. Correa said. You really need to get to know the community. Very critical. And just for example, we were planning to introduce some technology, give money to a community overseas, and we couldn't figure out why they were not receptive. And the technology was to provide closed restrooms, bathrooms for them, as opposed to going out and using open air. And they would rather take those $200 and have a facade for a door out in the forest, just so that they feel like they've got an entrance into the forest, which belongs to them, and didn't care about the restrooms. Very, very key to know the community.
I can be the contrarian and say dependency is not as bad as you think it is. I think that sometimes the disparity between wealth and empowerment and skills and life chances makes parts of the world where people are struggling, these sort of labs to experiment with things that aren't even achievable in our circumstance. And you just think about how dependent you are here at NC State on big systems. I'm talking about water, waste, energy, food. A lot of you drove here, so you're dependent on oil and carbon in your private automobiles, security. So it's sometimes a challenge, because the metric by which we measure the effectiveness of other parts of the world that don't have a lot of our conveniences is not the same stick with which we measure ourselves. And in terms of landscape architecture, we do things that are specific to products or people, but we are very interested in natural systems and in infrastructure. And in that realm, foreign aid, development, private market forces, and interest to handle big things like that is welcome. I think that at the level of social capital, at the level of information, at the level of empowerment, it makes sense to start to break those dynamics. But I think, on the contrary, that becoming more of a vocal advocate for clean water, for waste removal, for healthy food, for a lot of things that big connected centralized systems have been proven in other parts of the world to be the most effective ways to distribute those. It's fair to compare apples to apples and not require parts of the world that don't have those amenities to conform to a structure that we don't ourselves. But that being said, there are definitely avenues and opportunities to decentralize and distribute things.
I just wanted to add that we face that question all the time. It's an important ethical question, and a lot of folks have, our colleagues have maybe not paid as much attention to that concern and have seen negative outcomes of their research, of their well-intended work, have been greater negative outcomes than positive outcomes. And there are some, as Maria mentioned, we do depend, as professionals here, we depend, in an academic institution in the United States, we depend on obtaining external funding. And so often those external funding agencies don't see quite eye to eye with us in terms of ethics of intervening as empowerment, agents and change agents abroad, or even in the state. And so there's, for example, with USAID, which I have never obtained funding from them, but I understand that sometimes there's a Buy American clause in some of their programs, which is pretty insidious. And as Kofi mentioned, sometimes, like donating clothes kills the local textile industry. And if it's construction, road construction, and it has to be with US materials, then it would ruin the local ways of producing raw materials for construction. So there's those issues. The way I kind of deal with it is that what I think I'm doing is to work with vulnerable individuals that are often alienated, silenced, forgotten, and stimulate them to think through problems and solutions. And I bring in the tourism as a temptation, tourism opportunity as an excuse or as a motivator for them to kind of come together, yell at each other, have hope, and that building of social capital then can be leveraged to deal with the next problems, right? And so tourism maybe works for a little while, maybe some people make money, maybe then there's increased terrorism or economic distress in the West and no tourists go to Africa anymore. But still, that community sat around in a circle underneath a tree and they talked about their children, their youth, their problems, their droughts. And so with that in mind, I can live with myself and I can be enthusiastic. I think often it's going to, that could be paralyzing, that fear could be paralyzing. We want to make a difference, we want to do scholarship and improve the world, but we don't want to do these bad things or be naive about what we do. So it is a legitimate concern, and that's how I personally get around it.
Well, I want to thank all of you for, oh, you got one more question? Okay, one quick question. Yeah.
The social psychology answer for that would be self-determination and agency. So it's individuals feeling that they can control the aspects of the life that they find important. That's the short answer. I measure that through quantitative and qualitative methods. To give you an example, in Namibia, I was doing a study with World Wildlife Fund with a panda, and they had a lot of problems with poaching and with not putting kids in school and for women to be given to the husband's brother if the husband died, a lot of kinds of issues like that. And we basically asked them, what kinds of things do you do because you have no choice? What kinds of things do you do in life because you have a choice, but you would feel ashamed if you didn't do them? What kinds of things do you do because they are important? And what kinds of things do you do because that's who you are? And so we asked that broad question with a kind of a circle of people with 4-cell big paper and with translators with Oshavambo, the local language. We just kind of come up with those things and put smiley faces in a very kind of colorful and happy way, which is kind of participatory rural appraisal types of methods. And
well, like I said, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I'm a political scientist, and so I think underlying a lot of what they've been talking about is the politics of some of this as well. And we've ranged from enculturation and to the politics of doing good work. And I think all of these folks are doing excellent work, and thank everybody for coming tonight. And let's give a good round of applause for our panel.